All right, so today we are going to discuss a very important milestone which happened in the history of Pakistan and India, of course. And this is called the Lucknow Pact. And the Lucknow Pact, of course, was signed in 1816. Now, please do understand that a pact is not really a constitutional arrangement, it's not something that has come into force. It is not something which is there in bricks and mortar and it will be implemented in the form of a constitution and the country will be run on the basis of this. No, the pact is nothing like that. Pact is just an arrangement that two parties come up with, and they agree that any future constitution will be based on the principles agreed in this pact. So please do understand, pacts are not binding, they are agreements. What happened in the Lucknow Pact was that the Congress and the Muslim League, the two major political parties in India, they came up with some suggestions. They agreed to a certain point of reference on which they would proceed, and they would demand that the Constitution of India be made according to this pact and the demands embodied in this pact. So let's look at the background of this pact, the Lucknow Pact, and what necessitated it, and then why it became what it became, and what is its historical significance. Even though the provisions of the Lucknow Pact were never really fully put into practice in any constitutional arrangement. Please do keep in mind that the history of India and the history of Pakistan before partition is the history of constitutional advance. As the constitution and constitutional reforms were presented, the demands grew from the Indian population in general. General, by general, we usually mean the Hindu population, the majority, and by the minorities, the major among which were the Muslims. And they were also the best led at that point in history, which starts from around 1906 and ends in 1947. All right, so we are discussing today, we are looking at the period 1914 to 1916. So, what made the Lucknow Pact possible? What made this agreement between two determined opponents, Congress and the Muslim League? Now, please do keep in mind that the Lucknow Pact was the handiwork and it was a personal success for Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who before 1913 was known as the ambassador of unity, the ambassador of Hindu Muslim unity. And he had worked to bring the Hindus and Muslims closer. And even where he had not brought the Hindus and Muslims closer, he was definitely a nationalist who worked with the Congress from 1906 onward. But in 1913, an important incident took place in Kanpur, in which a mosque was partially demolished by the British, and because the British wanted to extend a road and the mosque stood in the way, so they demolished it. The Muslims protested and the British fired on them. Uh, this prompted Maulana Muhammad Ali Jauhar to request Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah to join the Muslim League, which he did on the condition that his joining the Muslim League will not in any way have an impact on his membership of the Congress. So he was very much a nationalist leader. By nationalist, here we mean Indian nationalist, fighting for the independence of India as a whole. But at this point, 1913, he also joins the Muslim League. And then immediately after that, the in the very next year, the Great War or the First World War breaks out, 1914 to 1918. Now, at this point in time, the British adopt a number of very repressive policies vis-a-vis India because there was rebellion in certain parts of the empire and the Indians were seen to be involved. However, the Quaid-e-Azam used this opportunity to work closely with the Congress to weaken the hold of the British and to hasten the possibility of home rule through constitutional means. Please do keep in mind that Jinnah was a constitutional agitator He did not believe in non cooperation and civil disobedience. He thought that all changes could be brought from within the institutions of parliament and through constitutional change in a very legal way. Now, uh, the high handedness of the British prompted um, the Congress and the Muslim League to hold their annual sessions in the same city in 1916, and that city was Lucknow. And for the first time, now do keep in mind that the Muslim demand for separate electorates, for example, Muslims had some special demands, specific demands. They had been there since 1905, since the Simla deputation. But they had met with stiff and vigorous opposition by the Congress party that did not consider Muslims to be a separate entity worthy of being represented separately from the general population, which, of course, in this case is the Hindu population. Their vision was that India is one country, and as these lectures progress, I'm going to discuss that further. However, in 1916, thanks to British high-handedness, uh, the Muslim League was able to present its demand of separate electorates for the first time, not to the British, but to the Hindu Congress. And they did reach some points of agreement. Now, what were the points of agreement? The point of agreement was that self government was the government that India wanted. All right. There had to be a separation of executive from the judiciary. Now, that is very important. The judiciary is one thing, and the rulers are the other things. But the most important point, which became the point of agreement, thanks to the genius of Quaid-e-Azam Jinnah, was point number five, in which one third of the representatives in the central government were to be Muslims. This was like a safeguard, this was like a quota which he was able to win on behalf of the Muslims. And then point number seven says that separate electorates will be there until all parties agreed to joint electorates. Now, these two were major concessions that the Indian National Congress appeared to give. Um, uh, you know, this was unthinkable. Please keep in mind that the Indian National Congress had passed resolutions against separate electorates all the way from 1906 to 1947. The only exception was the year 1916, in which they did not pass a resolution. In fact, they agreed in principle to the acceptance of separate electorates. A major victory for. Then there were also system of uh, weightages. Now, when you talk about weightages, what do you mean? That all right, you're giving us one third representation. You're giving us separate electorates. In return, the Muslims will also give something. What will the Muslims give? In provinces where Muslims are in a majority, they will compromise their majority a little and give the Hindus a little more seats. And likewise, in provinces where Muslims were an abject minority, the Hindus will give some seats to the Muslims to sort of make up for their less population. This sounded more like an American system rather than a British unitary system. So, but the Indian Council was to go. There were to be elected members, directly elected. And keep in mind, in those days, majority of members in the legislature were nominated. They were from the government side. They were officials. So how did the Lucknow Pact impact Indian politics? The Lucknow Pact was the first um, document which showed that there were points of agreement between the Hindus and the Muslims, between the Congress and the Muslim League, and it marked the acceptance by the Hindu Congress of some Muslim demands. Most importantly, the demand for separate representation. Uh, it dawned on the Muslims that maybe the better option for them from now on was to rely on the Congress rather than the British for safeguards and for protection, which they so desperately wanted. Please keep one thing in mind: from 1906 to 1947, the politics of the Muslims in India, the politics of League in India was mostly about safeguards, creating space for themselves in an India which is no longer ruled by the British but by the Hindus. Muslims did realize that the overwhelming majority of Hindus meant that they will be a permanent government. But in this permanent setup, what will be the position of the Muslims? That was something that the Muslims were most concerned about. The pact did bring about a degree of Hindu Muslim unity. Uh, there was another thing which came about because of this. Immediately after 1916, the very next year, the Home Rule League parties were formed, which means that now the Muslims were agreed that home rule will be the watchword. The home rule, ruled by Indians themselves, will be there, should be there, and will be there. And two parties were formed. One was the Home Rule League, formed by Mr. Tilak, who was an extremist Hindu leader, but the other was the Home Rule League, formed by Dr. Annie Besant. Dr. Annie Besant was a British who was living in India, and she was working for the Home Rule, or for more representation or self government by the Indians. And she was very active. She was even arrested and imprisoned by the British. So, this pact gave an impetus to the Home Rule movement. And here in this picture, you can see a very young Quaid-e-Azam with Dr. Annie Besant. He is to the left in this picture, and to the right of Dr. Annie Besant. So you can see him here. So these are the important things that happened as a result of the Lucknow Pact. So please do keep in mind, Lucknow Pact brought the Hindus and Muslims closer. It happened in 1916. It happened because of the high-handedness of the British. It for the first time and the only time in history, brought the Muslims and Hindus close enough where Hindus conceded to the demand of separate electorates. Of course, that was not to last. That was not to last at all. Uh, Shortly afterwards, when the fervor was gone, and we will see why that fervor disappeared. At this time, Mahatma Gandhi is not very strong a voice in Indian politics. He is very strong, but not that strong. He just came from South Africa in 1915. By the time he will establish himself, and we will see how he will establish himself in Indian politics, he will make sure that every provision of the Lucknow Pact was destroyed. All right, so this is up to this point. In the next lecture, we will look at the reforms that came and how things changed after 1920. Thank you very much.